Right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot of really excellent presentations to get through. Thank you everybody for showing up in person and on Zoom. We've had such an excellent season. We've got 6 fellows, which is the highest number of fellows we've ever had at the CSC. And I've just been really impressed with how these projects have covered such a wide range of disciplines and subjects. So I think that this is going to be really exciting for everybody to see what everybody else has done. So we'll go ahead and get started with Andres. Ready to go?
Yep.
Welcome, Pine and Alicia. We have actually just done a brief welcome, so you have not missed anything.
I get started?
Yep,
Yes.
yep.
All right. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Andres Berrigan. I'm a graduate from SUNY New Paltz, and I'm excited to introduce my project. I focus on off-trail hiking impacts on songbirds in the Catskill High Peaks. So there are 35 peaks in the Catskills above 3,500 feet. And if you ever hiked one of these high peaks, you might have noticed something interesting happen to the forest as you move up in elevation. Towards lower elevations, you see a lot of these trees, deciduous, your maples, your oaks. And as we move up to higher elevations, we see the tree community change. Around 3,000 to 4,000 feet, we see almost exclusively coniferous evergreen trees. The reason for this is that conditions at these elevations are just not ideal for the plants and trees growing at lower elevations, and temperatures are lower. So these spruce fir forests can exist because they don't have to compete with the tree community from the lower elevations. And here's a picture of what it looks like at the top of Slide Mountain. So these islands of habitat scattered across the high peaks are very vital for a specific group of songbirds that rely on them for their breeding grounds. And these are our montane bird species. Here are a few listed above. And it's even the breeding ground for one of the most rare and vulnerable songbirds in North America, bignell thrush. It's also important to note that these birds often nest on or near the ground, and unfortunately they are in decline as there is habitat loss in the high peaks. One big reason is climate change. The spruce fir forests of the high peaks are shrinking due to global temperatures increasing, right? And so the trees and plant communities that were previously limited to lower elevations can now creep up to higher elevations. But what we wanted to focus on is how human activity has been impacting this habitat, and more specifically, how hiking and informal trail networks are degrading this habitat. Now, what is an informal trail? Informal trails are unofficial trails that are made from repeated bushwhacking. Bushwhack is the term we use to describe when hikers go off a formally established trail and create their own path through an area. And over time, you can see that an informal trail can start as just some trampled vegetation, but through enough usage and soil erosion, we can see that the habitat becomes drastically different. The habitat changes and a lot of vegetation is disturbed. Informal trails also tend to disturb a greater area than formally marked trails, and many of our Catskill high peaks don't have formally established trails, and so these informal trail networks have been proliferating ever since the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, there's been an 86% increase in visitation and off-trail hiking immediately after the pandemic. It has leveled off since, but significantly more people going outdoors and enjoying this area. On top of that, hiking has never been more fun and accessible. We have groups like the Catskill 3,500 Club who encourage hiking these trailless peaks and will offer you badges and rewards for doing so. And also with smartphone apps like All Trails and Gaia, people just have a map, a GPS in their pocket, and so they'll feel more comfortable going onto these informal trail networks where they don't necessarily have formal markers to guide them. Now, I don't mean to paint any of this as a negative thing. It's definitely a positive thing that people are going outdoors and enjoying the Catskills like we're trying to do. However, we do have to be very mindful of how our activity is impacting wildlife and those habitats. So that brings us to our research question, which is, what is the impact of proliferating informal trail networks on birds in the Catskill high peaks? And to answer this question, we'd have to go to the high peaks ourselves. This is the second year of our research. And so over a year ago, our team established sampling points in Region 3 and Region 4 of the Catskill Mountains. And we put them into 3 categories: low visitation informal trails, high visitation informal trails, and established formal trails. And so when we had to head out and sample these birds, we hiked up the evening before, we camped overnight. And the reason why is because we had to arrive at our first sampling station 45 minutes before sunrise. And sorry, the video's not playing, but 45 minutes before sunrise. So we'd wake up at 4 a.m. and head out to our first point. Upon arriving at our first point, we begin the mountain birdwatch protocol, which we got from the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. They have used this protocol in the past to survey montane birds along formally established trails, and now we were using them to monitor montane birds along informal trails. And so what this protocol had us do, which is basically stand in 20 minutes at our sampling station for 4-point count periods, 5 minutes each, and we would write down our detections of bird species by sight and by sound, mostly by sound. Remember, we started 45 minutes before sunrise. It was often too dark to see any birds, and also the forest was dense, vegetation didn't really let us see the birds, so we identified them mostly by songs. And so we would hear Swainson's thrush, yellow-rumped warblers, winter wrens, and we'd write down the bird species and number of individuals we detected. Just to note too, yellow-rumped warblers are not a montane species, but we did find them on the Catskill High Peaks, and we weren't just monitoring montane birds, we were monitoring also all bird species. So after many rock scrambles, many rainy mornings, and a pair of hiking boots later, we got our results, which was our combined data from 2 years of bird surveys. And so we counted 805 montane birds across 8 species. These were our 3 most common species we saw or heard. And overall, the trend was less montane birds where there is higher visitation. As you can see on the graph, there was an average of 16 montane birds at informal trail low visitation points, while there was only 8 montane birds at formal trails with high visitation. And since we didn't just monitor montane birds, we did also detect and record all birds we heard. We had 2,017 birds in total across 33 species. These were our 3 most common species, but we saw this same trend, which means higher visitation equals less birds. So our combined bird count data shows that there are just less birds on trails with higher visitation. This makes sense. Birds tend to stay away from people. It's pretty well known that our presence, even though we don't mean to disturb them, will interrupt their natural behaviors, such as singing, time they spend foraging for food, or looking after their nests and their young. So perhaps we should expand measures investigating human visitation in the Catskills. However, I think continuations of the study should not neglect the possible correlation between trail class and condition and how many birds we're seeing. And the reason why I say this is because just from looking at our bird counts this year alone, we see that the trend changes. We actually see more montane birds at our formal trails with high visitation, and we saw the least amount of birds at informal trails with high visitation. There's going to be some natural variation year to year when we do our bird counts and our surveys, so it's not typically that unusual to see this difference, but with more sampling years, we can definitely get more data to feel more confident in the patterns and trends we are seeing. And so what can we do with this information that we already have? I hope everyone here learned something about montane birds, and just knowing about these vulnerable species can help us make more conscious decisions over how we will be navigating their habitats. So for example, avoiding off-trail hiking during the breeding season. And I highly recommend the Merlin app just to learn about your local species, your local birds, their migration pattern, and their breeding. And it's just an overall fun app to use. But what is already being done with this information? We have our friends here who joined us on our hike up to Sugarloaf, Pine, and Alicia. They're from the New York State DEC. And they got to tell us about one of their goals, which is to develop a visitor use management plan for formerly trailless Catskill Peaks. And our data is going to be used to inform them and be a part of their decision making. So thank you to them and the work they're doing. And with that, I'd like to give some more acknowledgements. Thank you to my team of field technicians, Danielle Tackix, Chris Gilliman, and Sam Mateo Jr. He was also a photographer and took some of the excellent photos you saw throughout this presentation. I want to thank Dr. Kara Belinsky from SUNY New Paltz. She was my mentor throughout this project and inspired my interest in birds. I did not know anything about birds until I took her course, so thank you so much to her. Thank you to our science advisor, Jason Hill from the Vermont Center of Eco Studies. And once again, thank you to Pine Roars from New York State DEC for being our natural resource manager. And finally, thank you to the Carey Institute, Josh, Joy, for making this all possible and for giving me this unique experience of enjoying the Catskill High Peaks. And with that, one last thank you.
Are everyone able to hear me on this computer? Okay, excellent. So we've got just a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions for Andres? You can just unmute, or John over in the room is excitingly.
Don't thank us, thank DEC for funding, because it comes, it comes from the Environmental Protection Fund, so thank you, Governor Hochul, and thank you, DEC, and thank you, taxpayers of New York. One quick question.
Sure.
The Vermont Eco Studies protocol and the circular plots, do you think not having a trail made any difference because they were developed for trails? And if so, what might it be?
Personally, no, I don't think so, because our detections were just, we would stand in the center, the way the protocol actually worked, we mostly just detected by sound, and then we distinguished if they were close to 50 meters or farther than 50 meters. And, no, I mean, the protocol is
Change
pretty
in
unbiased.
visibility wouldn't,
No,
because it was all.
it's mostly just, yeah, all by knowing songs, so I don't think it impacted that.
If you were detecting mostly by call
Mhm.
and in the dark or dusk, how could you determine if there was more than one representative of a
Yeah.
particular bird species?
Definitely, so I can definitely go back just to show you an example and elaborate more on what our protocol was really like, right? And so we would stand in the center, we designate like, it could be any direction, right? But we'd have our center. And the way we distinguish between multiple individuals of the same species was basically just by hearing them in different locations. And it was always possible that a bird moved.
Right.
And so that was also partly visibility. You could see when birds are moving between trees. And this is why we had 4 or 5 minute periods, right? So we would detect the same number of, as many individuals as we found during that 5 minute period. And after 5 minutes, we'd reset. And so that was more to determine, basically, are we hearing 2 individuals the whole time? Are we hearing 3, 1? Are they moving around? And it was basically like a soft reset. And we'd keep writing down what birds we heard consistently and in what direction. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect.
But you weren't doing it when there were other hikers around? 'Cause
Definitely not. We would definitely stop for anything.
So again, the question would be, would there be a consistent directional error that would make it more likely to count more birds in an area with low visitation than in high visitation? And in the areas with low visitation, would they move around more? So you would, I mean, it would be hard to find a directional error that made sense.
Yeah, and this method wasn't perfect. And when it came down to data analysis, we did have to filter out and find out our technique for really finding how many individuals were we going to count for 1 point count period, and for all 4 that we did. So it did take some thought to how we were going to use this in our data. But no, overall, as far as determining their movement, yeah, that was all just by ear and by sight. We had to definitely just pay attention the whole time and see if we couldn't get too many repetitions. I mean, yeah, that was definitely something in our mind to make sure we didn't repeat the same individual twice.
Great. We will have Justin.
Second of the balance is wrong.
No,
Is it in the drive, Joy?
yeah, yeah.
So for those people who arrived as we were starting, thank you. We have a phenomenal turnout.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Difference.
Is that the correct one?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
You. No, all right, hold on 1 second. I have to download it. This must have been an older, sorry, yeah, no, it's, I
You're fine.
switched the slides today, that's my fault.
There we go.
Gotta get things on both screens.
There you go. Sorry about that, you guys. Sorry about that. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm gonna talk a little bit about beech leaf disease, decline, and regeneration. I'll speak briefly about beech in the Catskills and beech leaf disease, as well as the monitoring study I'm conducting and the hyperspectral analysis study that I'm working on with the support of the CSC. American beech is a late successional species typically found in mature forest stands. It's the most shade-tolerant native broadleaf species, and due to its leaf density, they're heavily shade-producing trees as well. It's an important seed source throughout their range, and through the northern part of its range, it's the only native nut-producing species, so it's an important food source. This map shows the historical range of beech. A survey conducted in 1800 found that nearly 49% of forest canopy in the Catskills was beech. By 1972, that number had come down to around 12.5%, largely due to human disturbance, but beech remains common throughout the Northeast. As I just said, beech has a high leaf density, and the understory of beech stands tend to be darker and therefore less vegetated than surrounding forest. In addition, beech leaves are slower to decompose than many broadleaf species and form a dense litter cover on the forest floor. So as a result, beech stands tend to have less vegetation under them, the exception of beech seedlings. And so the loss of beech in a forest canopy creates a gap with very little native vegetation underneath it. So that is a kind of opportunity zone for invasives to proliferate. In fact, the loss of beech in the canopy will generally lead to a major-ish disturbance of the forest stand's microenvironment, and this issue is likely exacerbated in areas where the understory is heavily comprised of beech seedling suckers from mature roots, which is something that commonly happens with the presence of beech bark disease. So local seed sources and patterns of herbivory being a major driver of forest regeneration, what would we expect to regenerate here in New York as beech stands decline? We're starting to see some early iterations of this scenario in New York as a result of beech leaf disease. On the left is a beech stand with early stages of BLD infestation with a characteristically bare understory. And on the right is a beech stand in Westchester County where trees are exhibiting advanced symptoms of beech leaf disease, and the understory is now heavily invaded, in this case by Japanese stiltgrass. The disease is associated with the nematode Latentius crenatae mccannai, but there is still research ongoing as to whether the nematode is the sole cause of the disease or whether there may be a bacterial or fungal component to it as well. But the nematode lives inside beech buds and leaves, causing symptoms that begin with dark banding between leaf veins and advancing to malformed, gnarly leaves and finally leaf loss. Impacted leaves show up to 60% loss in photosynthetic capacity, and that eventually leads to tree mortality. The disease has spread rapidly from Ohio, where it was first located in 2012, reaching northern Maine in the east in just over a decade. The fact that it has spread east far more quickly than it has west suggests that it is at least in part airborne, but the exact vector of transport is still not entirely understood. And so the research we've set out to conduct is to look at the effects of beech leaf disease across an urban to rural gradient here in New York, from New York City to the Catskills, where we are observing the effects of beech decline on surrounding forest canopy as well as in the understory. And along this gradient, we expect to see variation in pressure driving regeneration from herbivory and invasive species and from additional contributing factors like existing diseases and climate variance. So to this end, in 2023, we established 32 monitoring plots along a 150-mile gradient. We have urban, suburban, and rural plots. In the urban plots, we're predicting that we would see high pressure from invasive plants, but low herbivory, as deer are not largely present in the city parks yet. In the suburban plots, we expect to see high pressure from both natives and both invasive plants and herbivory. And so far, that assumption seems fairly safe. And in the urban plots, the rural plots, we expect to see less pressure from both invasives and herbivory in general. We're using US Forest Service protocol for beech leaf disease monitoring so that our data will be compatible with the larger national network of over 300 BLD monitoring plots. And the plots are 1/10 of an acre and must contain at least 2 or more dominant or co-dominant beech trees. And within each plot, we sample all of the overstory trees, a subset of the midstory, and 5 1-meter seedling subplots. So in our first monitoring season, in our plots, we assessed over 550 overstory trees, including 330 beech, more than 100 saplings, and over 1,100 seedling stems. And very briefly, to just give an overview of the overstory data, the data from the first year showed that unsymptomatic trees were least common in the suburbs, particularly in Westchester County, while the Catskill sites were still largely free of beech leaf symptoms. And just to clarify, this is showing the mean percentage of leaves on all trees at a given site, not the percentage of infected trees. Striped banded leaves were common in the city and suburbs, and less so further south and further north. And again, this coincides with just the geographic spread of the disease. And then highly symptomatic trees were most common in the south. I've only just completed the 2024 assessment of these plots, so I don't have this year's data to present as of yet. But anecdotally, I can say that the disease has progressed rapidly in all of our monitoring sites, and that mature trees in Westchester County are starting to show mortality and a tendency to heavily invasive understories. In the Catskills, the number of asymptomatic trees declined significantly. Beech leaf disease is present in all of the plots, and some of the trees as far north as the Schwangunk Range are showing severe symptoms. So the other part of my research I want to discuss is the work that has been supported by CSC and New York City DEP this summer. To supplement my plot assessments, I'm also looking to use hyperspectral data to differentiate beech canopy from other trees. Combining this with the use of vegetative indices, I hope to create a method for tracking decline in beech canopy over time that could be used for management planning purposes. This image on the right here shows previous work that we've done tracking decline in hemlock stands from hemlock woolly adelgid. So I'm conducting this analysis using NASA AVIRIS data. AVIRIS is the Airborne Infrared Visible Imagery Spectrometer. And this is data that was collected for the North Shore of the Ashokan Reservoir and some of the Catskills in 2000. So it's not super current data. So using data provided by New York City DEP for their land holdings in the AVIRIS data footprint, this summer I collected data on 6 beech stands. For each pure beech stand, the edges of the stand were delineated by GPS line, and then within the stand, the location of every beech with a diameter greater than 25 inches was recorded. This minimum is to account for the age of the hyperspectral data. Trees that are smaller than 25 inches currently are unlikely to have been at the canopy level at the time the data was collected. So for this reason, we also recorded locations of large beech snags and cut stumps that appeared relatively recent. And then adjacent to the beech stands, we also delineate a stand containing no beech for comparison purposes. Here in this image, the southern stand is the beech stand, and the green are the beech, and then the northern stand is a non-beech stand, and there was one individual beech at the perimeter there. So I'm now in the process, with the help of another member of my lab, of using the data we collected as control points for a spectral mixing analysis. Spectral mixing analysis is a process which uses the reflectance properties of different components of a multispectral pixel to quantify the proportion of components in a given pixel. So for AVIRIS, it collects multispectral data on 224 bands. So there's information to be pulled out and then recombined to get a sort of proportionate scale. And we're using this process to try to differentiate the reflectance of beach leaves from those of surrounding non-beach. And this builds on previous work by the U.S. Forest Service at Bartlett Experimental Forest in New Hampshire to determine individual species abundance using a similar process. And then this image on the right is again a change in NDVI on the northern shore of the Ashokan Reservoir from 2009 to 2021. So we will overlay this kind of change data with the identified beach locations from the Avarice data and look for identifiable patterns of decline. So next, over the next month, I'm planning to complete the MSA analysis and try to ground truth the results by visiting a site that we identify as beach or two sites that I have not previously been to. I'm also, as part of my COC fellowship, working on a literature review of the state of forest health and monitoring that I'll be wrapping up over the next 2 months as well. And also working on and analyzing the 2024 BLD plot data and starting to look for trends between the 2 years of data that we've collected so far. Thanks.
So we've got time for just one question, either here or online, if anyone has a burning question for Justin. Now nobody's gonna want to say something.
So many questions.
Nobody wants to take this.
Justin, are you gonna ground truth once you get the analysis and the identification, you're gonna go back and find new beach stands and from that and ground truth it?
Yeah, so what I want to do is extract what we find to be the signature for beach across that entire footprint of the Avarice data on the North Shore, and then visit a location that I haven't been to yet to see.
See how well you did.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Justin.
Thanks.
Thank you. And Tara, ready to go?
That's quite a lot of collaborators. Well done.
Yes, those are all my plot locations.
Do you have an idea of what's spreading, whether it's deer or birds that are spreading the beach bark disease, or maybe just wind?
So it definitely seems airborne. There are some instances where it seems to have popped establishing as well, like it appeared on the coast of Maine before it came through a lot of New England, so there's potentially a bird vector as well.
All right, yeah. Hi, everyone, and hi, everyone. My name is Tara Ewers, and I'm a Master of Wildlife and Fisheries Resource student at Clemson University. It's an honor to have been chosen for the CSC fellowship program and to have spent the last few months researching wood turtle distribution and their associated habitats in the Catskill. So I just wanted to say a very quick thank you to the organization, to Carey Institute, Lisa Massey and everyone at New York State DEC, and my mentors, Chad Seawagon and John Foley. So my project is looking at the wood turtle distribution and their associated habitats in Catskill Park. Just a quick little background on wood turtles themselves. They are a semi-aquatic species measuring between 5 and 9 inches in length. They spend a good portion of the fall and the winter months brumating or hibernating at the bottom of well-oxygenated streams. But once the temperatures start to warm up in the spring, they emerge from these streams and bask in the sun, forage for food in the floodplain. And if they're sexually mature, which doesn't happen until they reach about 15 years of age, they will mate at this time. Later in the spring, females will begin to look for sandy banks along streams to make a nest and to lay a clutch of eggs. And because of these life history traits, the species requires a combination, I went backwards, I'm sorry. Requires a combination of both quality stream habitats and riparian and upland habitat. So this species was once much more common sighting throughout their range, which is most of the eastern seaboard down to the Appalachians, maybe like Virginia area, and up to southeastern Canada. But now they are threatened with the possibility of population collapse. They are actually right now under federal review whether or not they are threatened or endangered. And hopefully that decision will be made by Fish and Wildlife this year. They're supposed to be making it. And this is happening because of fragmentation, land use change, crushes that result from collisions with motor vehicles and farming equipment, capture for the illegal pet trade, loss of nests from both predation and flooding, and I want to say increased flooding as well, likely as a result of climate change. All of these have contributed to the decline in the population of these species. And I would say wood turtles need our help, but how? We don't really have good baseline data, and this is lacking not only in New York, but throughout their range. So really the purpose of this project was to establish a good base so that we can monitor the changes of this species in this particular area and start to answer the questions of what kind of help do they need and where do they need this help. In the 30 years prior to our survey, only a total of 31 turtles, tongue twister there, have been reported in the state or by the state in and around Catskill Park. I'm going to apologize in advance for my very cryptic and not so pretty maps. Wood turtles are poached for the illegal pet trade, and they can fetch up to $2,000 a piece. So it's really important that any information that we put out there won't actually lead to any poachers finding wood turtles, because they do in fact comb through scientific data and reports and presentations in hopes of finding where new populations are. So the maps that I'm going to show you really do not have a lot of detail, and they are kept cryptic on purpose. But you can see here previously, these are what's officially been reported to the state of New York prior to our survey. This is not to say that there aren't more turtles out there. These are just the official numbers.
That's individual turtles?
Individual turtles, right? That's not a lot over that span. The most are being found or were found in Ulster County at this time, with the fewest being found in Greene and Sullivan counties. Prior to the start of this project, we spent a few weeks looking at maps of Catskills, working with DEC to try to identify 20 kilometers worth of stream segments that we can survey. DEC and the state of New York owns 40%, a little over 40% of all of the land within Catskill Park. So you would think, looking at this map, you can see here, this is the green property, is DEC property. You would think it would be easy to find 20 kilometers of stream segments within this park. Unfortunately, most of the state's land is mountainous and it's not easily accessible, and there aren't really a lot of streams that necessarily go through these places. Our options were a lot more limited than we had initially anticipated. So after reviewing satellite imagery, working with DEC, we selected 30 potential sites. But as anyone who's ever done field work probably knows, the likelihood of everything going to plan, no matter how much pre-planning you do, it's probably pretty low, right? Multiple times we would arrive at a site only to find that the conditions of the site were unsafe. And this could have been because there was heavy rain the previous night and that led to fast moving water, or that the stream was just not, we could not go across it on foot. It was just too deep. A couple times we came across streams that were now in fact ponds, thanks to beavers. So a lot goes wrong, and we built in extra potential sites so that we could come up with 20 kilometers in the end. The time frame that we chose, 5 weeks between the end of May and early June. This time frame coincides with the pre-nesting and nesting periods for wood turtles. My field mentor on the left there, that's John Foley. He is a turtle whisperer. That is not his official title. He's a naturalist. We call him the turtle whisperer in our office because he has an uncanny ability to find turtles and will quite literally trip over them in the field. So who better to learn from than the turtle whisperer himself. We conducted presence absence surveys on a total of 28 stream segments within 25 sites for a total of 20 kilometers. So to better help DEC understand the habitat requirements for this species and the potential distribution, we simultaneously conducted habitat surveys in all of our stream segments and their floodplains. And we used the Northeast Wood Turtle Working Group protocols for this. So this is a map of a stream that we marked as absent. It doesn't look that exciting because there's no turtles found, but again, we put this up as the example because we didn't want anyone to be able to go back and try to figure out where turtles actually were. When we arrived at a site, we would record elevation, air and water temperatures, stream depth, width, substrate, flow. We would then select a random 3-meter plot in the adjacent floodplain and measured for percent tree canopy cover, average DBH, percent ground cover, and ground cover type. And we would then repeat this process approximately every 200 meters with the goal of getting a 1-kilometer stretch out of each segment. But unfortunately, we could not always get the full kilometer, and half the time it would be because we would just run into private property issues. So we would just run out of stream segment and we would do as much as we could. Sometimes it was also because the stream itself just wasn't safe. So safety first, right? When a turtle was actually located, and these are indeed turtles and not rocks, I promise you. When we did find a turtle, John and I would record their location, their morphometrics, and gave each of them a unique notch code. We then photographed them before putting them back in the same exact spot we found them. Habitat data from a 3-meter circular plot around each turtle was also recorded, and this was the same habitat data from our survey plots. In addition, we took slope measurements and distance to the stream bank for each turtle found. And I do want to say that finding these turtles, and Joy could probably attest to this because she came out one day, is actually a lot harder than it looks. They do look like rocks. And I cannot tell you the number of times my heart would start racing, like, oh, I found one, and it's a rock. So yes, it's difficult to find, but it's very rewarding when we do find. So I haven't gone through all of the data. I've gone through all the data. I haven't statistically gone through all of the data yet. So I have some preliminary findings here. Of our 28 stream segments that we surveyed, 11 were found to have turtles present in them at the time of our surveys. 9 of these sites did not have any records of wood turtles previously by the state. A total of 24 individuals were found, and they ranged in age from about 2 years, and that's the one on the left there, all the way up to mature adults nearing the end of their life expectancy, which is about 50 years old in the wilds. That one all the way on the right could potentially actually be over 50 years old. 2 of the turtles we found were deceased, and we also found 1 turtle crossing the road. Majority of the turtles were found in emergent wetlands within 10.5 meters to the stream bank, which is to be expected, especially for this time of year. But really, I just wanted to point that out to emphasize how important these emergent wetland habitats are and how important it is to protect them. So in the coming weeks, I will be creating maps for each of our segments, and that includes, oh yeah, thank you, Joy. There we go. I'll be creating maps for each of our survey segments that include both habitat data, the data we collected in the field, as well as additional remote sense data such as slope aspects and NLCD type. This will be combined with additional field notes and management recommendations for DEC. It is my hope that this project will not only result in management practices to help this imperiled species, but to also spur further research into the population, distribution, and dynamics in the Catskill region and beyond. So, thank you.
So I'm gonna go ahead and move us to the virtual fellows, and if we've got time left over at the end, we can ask questions to Tara or any of the other fellows that have not had the chance to answer questions. So, Jesse and Carly, if you want to go ahead and get your PowerPoint up, I believe that you should be able to screen share.
Oh, do we stop sharing?
Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it's done. You're not sharing.
Oh, yeah, no, it's still. There we go.
Okay,
Okay.
excellent.
Perfect. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so hi, my name is Carly Matthews, and I was one of the fellows along with Jesse, if you want to say hi. This summer we had the amazing opportunity to work with everybody here, the Catskill Science Collaborative, on the project of seeking first growth forest and old growth forest of the Catskill region through a process of elimination and evaluation. Okay. So just a brief historical background. In the 18th and 19th century of the Catskills, a lot of the forest was cleared or somewhat cleared for forest products such as timber, lumber, bark, and tanning and firewoods. And in this picture, you can see that for as long as you can see almost, that there's just a bunch of stumps and everything was cleared and used for human purposes. And in this picture, you can see land cleared for mostly agricultural purposes, which is a key part of our project and the human impacts have had a lasting legacy within the Catskills, which we're still trying to figure out what the full impacts were. So with this long history of human impacts, there is a lot of mystery still involved in it, and that has caused a lot of forest historians such as Dr. Michael Kudish, who we had the pleasure of working with and contributing to his lifelong project on this project. And we're just trying to figure out the extent of what was cleared and what is still considered first growth. I think somewhere it was stated that there's less than 20% of the Catskills that is still considered first growth. So our project objectives were to update and complete the ongoing efforts of identifying cleared forest lands through a process of elimination to identify candidate sites for first growth forests, complete and digitize hand-drawn maps created by Michael Kudish, and seek additional information in the aid of identifying remaining forest that preserved into the 1900s, and then potentially then going on a field evaluation. And our fourth objective was to conduct a comprehensive analysis to evaluate the method of locating potential old growth forest in nearby suitable sites, which is still in progress. So to complete our first objective, I digitized historical clearings within the Catskills using GIS to create polygons of areas within the USGS 1940s topographical maps, and to make it all unified, we tried to use the maps at a scale of 1 to 24,000 to 24,000. But unfortunately, I think for two quadrangles, Willomac and Claryville, we had to use maps that had a larger scale, which was 1 to 62,500. So it was still from the 1940s, which was important because that was the earliest that the USGS created these topographical maps within the whole Catskill Park. And I digitized polygons within an elevation of 2,000 and up. And in the bottom corner, you can see an example of a USGS topographical map. And you can see the white versus the green. So the green is still forested and the white is what is cleared. And I mapped pretty much anything from 2,000 feet and up. And I used a digitizing scale view of 1 to 5,000 just to keep all the polygons uniformed and not to like hone in on like specific details of it, but just enough to keep the general shape of it. Because I think I said this before, but this was a somewhat like simple task, but it took a very, very long time to digitize all of these. And then second part of the project was to update first growth hand-drawn maps from historian Dr. Michael Kudish. And we did this by digitizing, uploading the hand-drawn maps into GIS and geo-referencing them, which was a little difficult because they didn't have tick marks. So we had to like upload it, make it bigger, make it smaller, scale it, try to use like the USGS topographical maps to locate where even the quadrangle was. But it worked out eventually. And the two GIS maps, like projects, objectives of these projects are very important because Dr. Kudish, he uses what is called the forest belt, which is an area between agricultural clearings, which was shown in the last slide, and his. So the forest belt is the area between cleared cut areas and potential first growth. So the area was used by farmers to cut timber down for their own use. So there, like, as Dr. Kudish walks up the mountain, he gets to see like the gradual difference in the vertical difference between clear cut and potential first growth. And then he marks this down as a potential, as an entry point, and draws all of his hand-drawn maps based on the forest belt.
Okay, we're turning it over to me. Hi, I'm Jessie Rosenthal. I'm the other fellow in this project. What I was working on was more, it's almost like kind of detective work. I was searching for photographs, historical photographs to compare to present day photographs or images from Google Earth in the Catskills to compare them. What I did discover, the Catskill Area Civilian Conservation Camps were camps created after the Great Depression to both reforest areas that, as Carly had mentioned, were kind of devastated by the colonization of this country and the use of its resources, to sort of replant them. The reason we wanted to find out these areas where the trees were replanted was to sort of rule out places that would not in any way be first growth forest. So we were also interested in what trees were planted and the locations of those. I have a list of likely species that were planted there. The locations of these Catskill Area Civilian Conservation Camps are listed to the right. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is an example of a record of trees planted from a 1942 annual report. It's a photograph of people likely working in one of the conservation camps, planting trees in a clearing. Frustratingly, I was not able to find any exact information of the locations, not only of where the trees were planted, but even of the camps themselves. Most of them were either just taken down or repurposed into other things, but there was no record keeping of that. Next slide, please. This is an example of one of the few records. This is the most information I was able to find of the trees that were planted. It's a little hard to see, but as you can see, it says the counties and what trees and the number of trees planted, but no locations. So that was the most information I could find on that. Next slide, please. So we discovered that many historical photos and even illustrations or paintings of the Catskills, the Hudson River Art School comes to mind. There's a great exhibit of that at the Albany Museum of History and Art, if anyone's interested. Up on the top three are old either photographs. In the middle might be a painting, and on the far right is, I think, a colorized photo. And on the bottom is a modern picture of those same exact locations. Next slide, please. So the photos that follow, here's an example. This I used in the background a painting of the area that someone had made. I searched through multiple New York State and even national digital photo libraries and archives for photographs or illustrations made of the forested areas in the Catskills from 1940 or previous. The most fruitful was the New York State Digital Archives. It contained the vast majority of usable photographs where I could find enough information to locate the present day sites. I was able to find a total of 193 photos and that were usable. And from that number, I was able to locate 46 of those on Google Earth. Next slide, please. Here's an example of, it's called Breakneck, a view of the Hudson Valley along the Hudson River. That's the title of the photograph. And on the right is the Google Earth image of that same location. Next slide. This I thought was particularly interesting, the Stissing Observation Tower, because you can see that the land in the background, the land use patterns are very similar to on the Google Earth photo on the right as they were when the photograph was taken, which this one might have even been early 1900s, late 1800s. I thought that was particularly interesting that not much had changed. Next slide, please. This is the view up the Esopus Creek from a bridge that was unidentified, but I think you can see on the right it is now a through road. It's in Glen Eyrie, north of Kingston. So that's also quite similar, even though it's an interesting pixelation from the Google Earth photo. Next slide, please. Here's another example, the Hudson River, Rosendale Bridge, and Jacob's Nose. Very similar in each photo. Next slide, please. And here is an aerial view of North Lake and South Lake. It might be a little hard to see, but on the right are just, you can see a campground and some other modern things there. There was a clearing in the original photo that has been forested over. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the search is ongoing. We didn't have enough time or resources to investigate each of the sites, the 46 locations in person. But this method is promising for identifying sites that may contain first growth forest in the Catskills. The maps would require periodic updating. The CCC reforestation sites, as I mentioned, were hopelessly obscured. I contacted everyone from DC to Parks Department to the federal government, and their locations, I think, are lost to history, as are the plantings of the trees. But the historical photos, I think, hold more promise to reveal first growth forest sites. The contact information on the bottom is for myself and Carly. Next slide, please. And we want to thank the Catskill Science Collaborative, the New York State DEC, Siena College, and a special thanks to Dr. Mike Kudish, Steve Paricio, Marissa Trojan, Josh Ginsberg, Joy Damon, CSC coordinator. We thank you all very much for your support. On the right, we just want to mention is a photograph of a site we were able to visit that the Harvard had identified as a site of first growth forest. That's a downed tree, very old downed tree, and we just thought that was kind of interesting, so we wanted to include it. And I think that's our last slide, right, Carly? Okay, that's our presentation. Thank you very much.
Jesse and Carly, that was awesome. That was wonderful. And Mara, Carly, if you can go ahead and stop sharing. And then Mara, you should be able to pop yours up.
Okay. I have never done this before, so
Okay. So there should be a thing at the bottom of your Zoom that's a green button that says share, and that will
yeah,
share your screen.
I need to grant it access real quick.
Okay. That's on your end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
There you go.
okay.
Yep.
You can all see that?
Yep. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Maura Vanderputten. I'm a fellow and I go to SUNY Purchase. My advisor, Dr. George Kramer, and we've been working on this project on non-native plant species on hiking trails in the Catskills. So a non-native species is one that is existing outside of its native range. They can be brought over intentionally or sometimes unintentionally. Intentionally would be like ornamental or for food, or and unintentionally, sometimes they just get caught in cargo. It's just a global economy and happens. A non-native species can often give way to invasive species. They can also become invasive species when they start to cause harm to their environment. This can occur when they have no natural predators or have some other sort of unnatural advantage in competition with native plants, and they form monocultures, which reduce biodiversity, which is generally not a good thing. So we studied 6 non-native and invasive species with the goal of tracking their abundances and exact geographic distributions of these high-risk invasive species. A lot of this has to do with their dispersals. There's a lot of different ways that a plant can disperse. Some of them rely on wind and air and water. Some of them rely on other animals distributing them throughout places. Some of them rely on humans. Sometimes seeds get stuck under people's boots, especially hikers, and they bring them up the trails. So here are our study species. We have Japanese stiltgrass, Japanese barberry, Milominate, Amur honeysuckle, garlic mustard, and periwinkle. Something that I think is worth pointing out is with garlic mustard, these little seed pods, they're called siliques right here. If you can see where my cursor is pointing, those hold the seed pod. Those are little seed pods that hold the seeds, and they essentially just fall out of the plant. They don't go a very far distance. Garlic mustard doesn't really have a lot going for it in terms of dispersal. They'll go as far as maybe a meter. And that'll be relevant in a second. Here are our trail locations. These red spots are all of our trails. We were all over the Catskills, mainly in the central area. We studied 26 different trails. So data collection was done between May and July. Again, 26 different trails. We're counting garlic mustard out of all of our species. We specifically counted only year 2 flowering stems because year 2 flowering stems or reproductive output is proportional to the amount of year 2 flowering stems. So we didn't count a lot of the year 1s that we saw. In that case, there would be a lot more. We also didn't count the exact amounts of plants that we saw for each species, only occurrences, except for with garlic mustard. With garlic mustard, we counted the exact amounts that we found. So we did this with Survey123, which is an app that's connected to ArcGIS, where it essentially puts the data points. We open it up, mark the exact location of where we found the species. We it tells us, it puts it on a map that we can access through ArcGIS later. And then I use some linear referencing tools to essentially measure how far along the trail each of these occurrences were, as well as their elevation, slope, and aspects. We have all these data points with all this information in it. And here are some results. So we have a lot of zeros here. We found periwinkle on one trail, but a lot of the trails had garlic mustard. So this table is showing the percent of trails that we found each species at. We found on most trails, we found garlic mustard. They were pretty commonly found at both the trailhead parking lots and the trails. We don't see that same pattern with Japanese barberry. They are more common along the trails themselves. So here we have some essentially raw data of garlic mustard abundances. We have Elm Ridge with as high as 5,000 individual garlic stems. Something surprising about this is actually Pikamoose. This is a really popular spot in the Catskills. We found no garlic mustard. We didn't even find any of our other study species. This will be the second year in a row that we've actually found none of them. Yeah, and lastly, we have depth penetrated. So this is showing how far along a trail that this is showing the depth that they've gotten into the trail. So essentially, you can see this pattern where they sort of decrease as you go along. They're less common at these higher kilometers. For this one, for these two trails, I actually want to say that these were found at lean-tos, which are, like little camping spots, which are like pretty disturbed areas where humans spend a lot of time. I want to say that hikers are bringing garlic mustard up there. They generally don't grow above like 500 meters. So to find them at this high elevation is pretty surprising, but I want to say that this is because of the human disturbance at the lean-tos. This is also pretty surprising because the study we're comparing this to, Zimmerman 2007, they found garlic mustard at about up to 0.4 kilometers into a trail. So they're obviously, it's getting a lot deeper. And with barberry, they're pretty all over the place. We found them quite frequently, just anywhere. And that's it. Any questions?
Much, Mara. And so what I'm thinking is, in the interest of everyone's time, since it is 8:03, if anybody needs to go, feel free. But I was thinking for those who can stay, and especially if the fellows can stay a little longer, if we have any questions about any of the projects, you can go ahead and ask those now. But before we, questions for the fellows that we were unable to have question times for. Or the ones that we were able to have question times for.
Take all the way. That's why we said that.
I
Thank
have
you for coming. Can you get out on your
That
own?
was a pleasure.
Can you figure out how to get out?
I think so.
Okay, up the stairs right, and then to the hallway and right, and you're there.
Okay.
Question?
Good seeing you, Justin. We'll be in touch.
Yes.
Got some feedback on the reference list.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jesse. I've got you up on the big screen.
Oh, thanks. I had a turtle question. I was curious as to, I remember, I'm so sorry, I forgot the presenter's name.
Tara.
Sarah?
Kara, hi. I was really curious when you mentioned that you found a couple of deceased turtles. I just wondered what was the manner? Was it like hit by car or?
No. You would think we would have found one. The one we found in the road actually was not hit by a car. It was about to get hit by a car. John stopped and saved it.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, the first deceased one we came upon was actually in the middle of a public fishing rights right of way. It was a mowed trail that fishermen use to access streams. And we could hear farming equipment in the distance. So our immediate thought was that this turtle had been hit by the mower that mowed this field.
Yeah.
But after inspecting the turtle, There were no obvious signs of injury. We did collect the deceased turtles upon DEC's request. They do, oh, it's not an autopsy. What is it when it's an animal?
Necropsy.
Thank you, necropsy.
Yeah.
On it. They haven't said to us what it was that actually caused the cause of death, but
Yeah.
the other one we found was also the only one we actually found in the stream. It was dead
Oh,
in the stream.
wow.
Yeah, it looked like it had died probably over winter, whether that was through disease or predation. I
Gotcha.
don't know. It was covered in algae, so
Mm-hmm.
it had been there for a while and it was partially predated.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't tell how long before that had happened. So,
Mm.
yep,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
And George, it looks like you have a hand up.
Yes, I did. I do. My question's for Jesse. I really liked the historical approach, and I'm wondering if you can tell me exactly where you took that photograph that mirrors the Cole painting, the one in the middle of your of
Oh,
that
I
slide with
wonder,
the 6.
that might even be one from Dr. Bogan. You might have found that.
Yeah, I'll weigh in because I think if we go back to those, I'll show them too. If I can. Well, I guess I can't share screens, but
You should be able to share still.
yeah. So these I pilfered from social media.
Yeah, I think people are onto this now that they're doing a lot of these comparisons on social media.
The one, let's see, make sure I'm sharing correctly. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
The one on the right, I'm sorry, on the left, was the very first one, and it caught my attention because I'm working on some other kind of landscape change research with wildlife and the Forest Service, and so we're looking at urbanization. And this caught my attention. It's from Historic New England. It was on Facebook. I'll admit it. And actually, these other 2 photos were taken and posted to that social media. So it's kind of interesting because it's kind of a crowdsourcing approach, it already linking some of these old historical photos or paintings to actual locations. So there might be additional work, even just scouring social media.
So what was the group? It was historical.
Historic New England, I believe.
Historic New
I
England.
can double check that too, and I can send you the link if that's not quite accurate enough to find or.
Okay.
The
Okay.
middle one looks a lot like Route 28 to me. I'm not sure what section, but it may not be.
I'd have to look into my notes. I think I do have the information for that though.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah. The picture on the left is from Massachusetts, I will admit. It's not the Catskills, but it is something that kind of triggered my idea. The idea.
It's a proof of concept.
Yes.
All right, excellent. Do we have any more questions, either in person or online? I don't see any hands up on my Zoom. Okay. Well, then I will let everybody enjoy the rest of their Wednesday night. Thank you all again. I'm so glad that everyone was able to show up either in person or on Zoom, and we got to have a little hybrid adventure together. So thank you all so much for all of the work that you've done this summer.
Thanks for facilitating.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael, for making us.
Thank you,
No
Michael.
problem. Everything was amazing, everyone.
All right, have a wonderful
Have a good evening, everyone.
evening.
Yep.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
And thank you guys who made it here. It was so nice to be able to do it here. We haven't for so long.